It was the war America couldn't win, one that cost over 58,000 American lives and millions more in Vietnam. For 2 decades, the world watched in horror as jungles burned, cities fell, and entire families were torn apart. But when the end finally came, it didn't look like a heroic last stand. Instead, it came in chaos, desperate crowds at an embassy wall, helicopters lifting off into the night, and an entire nation changing hands in just a single day. This is the story of how one of the most powerful militaries in history found itself trapped in a scramble for survival, and why the fall of Saigon remains one of the most haunting moments of the 20th century. For the first time in history, war wasn't just something people read about in newspapers. It was broadcast directly into their living rooms. Cameras captured every firefight, every burning village, and every coffin draped in the American flag. Unlike past wars, where governments controlled the story, Vietnam unfolded in real time on the evening news. Journalists had almost unrestricted access to the front lines. Viewers saw patrols in the Mekong Delta, soldiers trudging through mud, and civilians caught in the crossfire. These raw, unfiltered images shocked the American public, fueling protests at home and deepening doubts about why the war was being fought in the first place. Vietnam became known as the first televised war, and those images, grainy, brutal, unforgettable, changed how the world viewed conflict forever. America pulls back. By 1973, it was clear America's will to fight was fading. The Paris Peace Accords officially ended U.S. combat involvement, and the last American ground troops withdrew from Vietnam. But while soldiers left, Washington still tried to prop up South Vietnam, though with far less money and support than before. This sudden pullback left the South dangerously exposed. Supplies ran low, morale collapsed, and without American firepower, the balance of the war shifted almost overnight. To the North, this wasn't just a chance. It was the signal they had been waiting for. The countdown to collapse had already begun. The final offensive. In March 1975, the storm finally broke. The North Vietnamese launched a massive assault through the Central Highlands, and city after city fell like dominoes. What stunned the world was how quickly it all unraveled. Fortresses that were supposed to hold for months collapsed in days. As tanks rolled south, panic spread across the countryside. Families fled in endless streams, carrying whatever they could on their backs. Soldiers abandoned posts, convinced the fight was already lost. By April, the road to Saigon was wide open, and everyone inside the city knew the end was only a matter of time. The capital was bracing itself for a showdown. But the real nightmare was still to come. The battle for Newport Bridge. On April 28, 1975, just 2 miles from Saigon, the war's last brutal clash erupted. A small Viet Cong unit, no more than a few dozen fighters, stormed Newport Bridge, setting it ablaze and trapping thousands of South Vietnamese soldiers and civilians on the wrong side. What followed was a desperate struggle. South Vietnamese troops charged again and again, only to be cut down by mortars and machine gun fire. For hours, the bridge became a slaughterhouse, hundreds fighting to the death against barely 20 enemy fighters. By nightfall, the South retook the bridge, but victory meant nothing. The capital was collapsing all around them, and the enemy was still closing in. This was only a pause before the final blow. Operation Frequent Wind. The next day, Saigon woke up to a strange sound on the radio, Bing Crosby's White Christmas. To most, it seemed harmless, but for those in the know, it was a secret code. The Americans were pulling out. What happened next was pure chaos. Families rushed to the U.S. Embassy, desperate to escape. Parents pushed children over walls, begging strangers to carry them to safety. Marines hauled people up by their arms as thousands crushed forward, terrified of being left behind. Inside the embassy compound, helicopters landed one after another, lifting 30 evacuees at a time to American carriers waiting offshore. But for every person who got out, hundreds more were still pressed against the gates, pleading for a miracle. As night fell, the last helicopters rose into the dark sky. For many watching below, it wasn't just the end of the war. It was the end of their entire world. The fall of Saigon. On the morning of April 30th, 1975, the sound of engines echoed through the streets. North Vietnamese tanks smashed through Saigon's defenses and rolled straight toward the presidential palace. There was no last stand, no heroic defense. The South Vietnamese army had simply melted away. day. By midday, communist troops poured down the city's main avenues, their red and yellow flag waving above the palace balcony. In just a few hours, a capital that had once been the center of America's war effort was gone. For those who lived through it, the shock was indescribable. The city hadn't fallen in weeks of bloody street battles. It had been handed over in a single afternoon, and with it, an entire nation changed forever. Aftermath and betrayal. For the people of South Vietnam, the fall of Saigon wasn't just defeat, it was betrayal. They had fought for years alongside American forces, only to watch their ally vanish when they were needed most. Entire families were torn apart in the chaos of evacuation. Some believed they would only be gone for weeks, that they could return once things calmed down. But for many, exile became permanent. Refugees scattered to camps across Asia and beyond, never knowing if they would see their homes or even their loved ones again. Those left behind faced a new reality under communist rule, while bitterness toward America grew. To many South Vietnamese, it felt as though their sacrifice had been written off, their country abandoned for nothing. The war was over, but the wounds it left would never fully heal. The legacy. The fall of Saigon wasn't just the end of a war. It was the collapse of an entire strategy. America had entered Vietnam to stop the spread of communism, but left with nothing but shattered lives and a scarred reputation. Historians call it one of the greatest policy failures in U.S. history, a war fought without clear purpose and ended without a clear plan. Decades later, the haunting images of helicopters lifting off the embassy roof were replayed when Kabul fell in 2021. Once again, the world saw a superpower scrambling to leave as allies begged not to be abandoned. The parallels were impossible to ignore. Vietnam left behind a lasting lesson that no amount of firepower can win a war fought without understanding, without unity, and without an exit strategy. For America, it proved that even the strongest empire can bleed. And for Vietnam, it was the day history changed forever. The Vietnam War was unlike anything the world had seen before. It was the first war brought directly into people's homes, the first where America's power failed so publicly, and the first where millions of voices, from soldiers to civilians, were left with nothing but loss. From the desperation at Newport Bridge, to the coded song White Christmas, to the tanks crashing through Saigon's gates, every moment carried a sense of inevitability. The war ended not with victory, but with chaos, betrayal, and lessons that still echoed decades later. The fall of Saigon wasn't just the end of America's longest war at the time. It was a warning to future generations about the cost of fighting battles without purpose, and it remains, even today, one of the most haunting reminders that even the most powerful nations are not immune to defeat. The story of Vietnam didn't just end in 1975. It lives on in the memories of those who were there and in the lessons we continue to debate today. What do you think? Was the war ever winnable, or was it doomed from the start? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your perspective. If you found this story eye-opening, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter in history's untold stories. And remember, sometimes the most shocking moments in history aren't about victory at all, but about how quickly everything can fall apart.